But let me do that as our launch in. Um, I would say that one of the things that and we'll for certain talk way more about medical aid in dying in next week, when we do the end of life stuff. Today, the focus is on sort of ethics in healthcare for people like us, people that are uh, capable, autonomous, independent, get to make our own choices, and we're going to be playing around with the boundaries of those choices and playing a bit around the protections for those choices. So, what are the rights that we have in the healthcare context around the things that people can do to us? I think that's the right way of putting it. And we'll talk more next time about MAID. What we're playing with here is this concept of frailty, and I think we'll end up talking. Well, we'll talk about that a bit today, and maybe in more detail next time. Um, Roughly, that concept of frailty maybe connected with a notion of vulnerability, is something. It's a question about the extent to which that limits the choices that I might make, and yeah, we'll do that in way more detail. But let's just park it as, what are the boundaries around the choices that I get to make on my own behalf? And what MAID has done with the introduction of MAID, it's really forced people to think about what those boundaries are. It shifted the boundaries about the things that I could choose, um, shifted the boundaries around the things that people could assist me with. Um, and sort of the next set of puzzles is, where are the new boundaries? And to what extent are we going to shove those new boundaries? So let me pick up where we finished last week. We were talking about kids last week. So, the contrast is something like an attitude towards children that says they should be protected. So there's something special about children. They have a special status within our community, and it's a status that means that we as a community have got an obligation to nurture them, to protect them. I probably quoted the objectives of the Healthcare Consent Act and the Child, Youth and Family Services Act. Healthcare Consent Act is an act to promote autonomy. The CFYSA talks about promoting the best interests of children. So the Healthcare Consent Act is not an act to promote the best interests of grown-ups. It's an act to promote their autonomy. And one of the things that we're going to play around with today is banging home that, what's the difference? What's the difference between my rights, if you like, and my well-being? And I think a ton of issues that arise in the healthcare context are exactly around that topic. What's good for me, what I'm entitled to, and what the difference is between those two, and where we end up falling as we sort of work our way through those. Now, at the end of last week, we did the usual, evaluation. What do you want to talk about piece? And we got one response that said, hey, what about MAID for Kids? So let's start there. When medical aid in dying was first introduced, so 2016, I think, we're almost 10 years in. 2016 was the Supreme Court of Canada Carter decision, and then the law sort of it came in a year or so after that. At the very beginning, there were 3 reports commissioned to look at what was predicted to be contentious issues with medical aid in dying. So one of them was medical aid in dying for people who solely have a mental health condition. We'll for certain talk about that more next week. Lockie, you can talk about that next week. So that's one, identified as contentious right at the very get-go. The second one was made for people who make advance requests. So that is new legislation, well, now a year-old legislation in Quebec that will allow people on their diagnosis, while they're still capable, to say at some time in the future, I'd like to have access to MAID. So contentious from the very beginning, available now in Quebec, still contrary to the criminal code, because it doesn't follow the rules that govern the federal rules that govern MAID. But the Quebec Ministry of Justice, whatever the right word is there, has said that they won't prosecute if physicians follow the regulations that have been laid down to permit MAID for advance requests there. We'll talk about that next time. It's a really interesting, puzzling question about the limits of the choices that I can make on my own behalf and the things that I can bind you as my care providers to do on my behalf. So just a whole load of puzzles there. And then the third area was made for people under the age of 18. So our legislation says you can't have MAID if you're under the age of 18. So I'm going to ask you two questions. Let me start with because I think there are two different questions. So number one, should we permit medical aid in dying for people under the age of 18? Go. No, I'm not going to answer this. You answer it. Aurelia, could you throw up a poll? Is it possible? Can you do it that quickly? Should we permit medical aid in dying for people under the age of 18? And that's a straight yes or no right now. If you could do it, great. If not, chime in. Come on, people. Speak to me. Put your hands up. Get off the fence.
I'm exclusively seeing yeses in the chat so far.
Oh, I should look at the chat. Yeah. Yeah, I should have thought of that. Yeah, they are all yeses. Oh, Belinda wants to sit on the fence. Okay, we'll come back to Belinda on the fence in a minute. But let me do the yeses. So let me qualify my question a bit. What we have currently is medical aid in dying for people who are able to consent. So let me use that as a sort of a qualifier. Should we permit medical aid in dying for people under the age of 18 who are capable of consenting to MAID? So sometimes people would talk about an emancipated minor, that sort of idea. That makes sense. So let me just maybe be a bit more specific. In Ontario, we don't have an age of consent to healthcare. You should be nodding. Yeah, you all know this. In order to consent to healthcare, I must be able to understand and appreciate the nature of the decision that I have in front of me. So it's really decision and time specific. We're going to spend a whole load of time talking about that today. So the way MAID works is I've got to be capable of consenting to MAID. I've got to be able to make the request. Could a person under the age of 18 be capable of consenting to MAID? So that's sort of question number one. And I think that's probably the question that most people have answered yes to. And that's I don't know, that's almost a no-brainer, right? So what's magic about the number 18 or the age 18? Nothing. You can readily imagine people under the age of 18 who are capable, understand and appreciate the nature of their medical condition, and where they make I'm going to use the word appropriate or reasonable decision, their continued life and their death is intolerable, and so they choose MAID. So are you nodding there? Does that sound plausible to you? You can imagine that. And you can also imagine that it's absurd to think that on the moment of their 18th birthday, they suddenly become capable whereas the day before they weren't. So that's one question to which I think people are saying yes. There's a different question. Should you allow parents, substitute decision makers, to permit, request, have medical aid in dying for their incapable children? Go on, I'm still looking at the chat. Nobody's saying anything.
Some yeses, a no, but at this point, mostly yes.
Oh, I'm getting some yeses. So what would be the you'll remember what's his name? Robert. I didn't prepare this. The guy who killed his daughter in Saskatchewan. His name is what? Somebody help me. Come on, you must remember. But you know who I mean. Yeah, good. Somebody knows who I mean. It's going to really bug me until I remember it.
Latimer was mentioned in the
Latimer,
chat.
Robert Latimer. Thank you, Joanne.
Joanne, yeah.
Thank you, Joanne. Robert Latimer's story and his daughter's story is a tragedy. Um, the young girl, maybe she was 10 or 11, 12, something in that age range. She had a whole litany of terrible congenital defects, challenges, problems. Her dad said that she'd gone through 43 different hospitalizations and operations, and it was awful. And her dad said, her dad who loved her, and I don't think anybody had any doubt whatsoever that this was the quintessential loving father. He took the view that her continued life was intolerable from her perspective, right? So looking from the outside, and I'm going to come back to Belinda's piece in a minute, because this is really tricky, the thing that Belinda is picking up here. Robert Latimer, from the outside, looked at his daughter from the outside. He could not live her life. And she could not articulate, the way that we talk about things, what her life felt like. He was interpreting the way in which she acted. So he was standing on the outside and looking at what he took to be the pain in her life, the unremitting, from his perspective, challenges that his daughter was living. And he decided that it was cruel to make her continue to do that. And he killed her. Um, Now, if medical aid in dying had been permitted, he would have had a route to go through which would have allowed a system of checks and balances, a system that would ensure that it's not somebody who's losing it and who needs further help, who's, at the end of their rope, and so they perform that action. If medical aid in dying for people under the age of 18 who were not capable had been permitted then, Robert Latimer would have been able to apply on behalf of his daughter to have somebody end her life in a way that was controlled, comfortable, and so on. Does that make sense? Should that be permitted? Now, you don't worry about the facts of the Latimer case in that, you might disagree with what he did. That's not really the point. Could you imagine a situation where the burdens of life are so great for a child that compassionate, thoughtful people standing on the outside could make an external judgment on the internal lived life of that child and say they are better off dead? I'm getting yeses, but only a few. Let me go back to Belinda's point, which is really, Belinda, I think you're making a really important point. It's, who knows what my life feels like? Who's the only person in the universe who knows what my life feels like? Me. I mean, that is, each one of us are locked into it, inevitably locked into our own experiences. I should get nods from you. I mean, even the people that are closest to you don't know what it's like to be you. In fact, you probably tell them that. I mean, that's an ongoing conversation between people, right? You don't know what it's like to be me. You don't see what I see. You don't feel what I feel. You don't do what I do. You don't know that, because we're inevitably locked into who we are. However, the challenge is that in a whole bunch of circumstances, people from the outside are stuck making judgments about what that life is like from the inside. Now, Belinda, yeah, y- yes. Um, and we're going to spend the rest of this session talking about that different lifestyle idea and what it means to protect that. So we're coming at independent, autonomous, free choice from, we're not starting there. So we're going to come to thinking about what it means to have different lifestyles, what it means to have a different conception of the world, what it means for me to be free to make my own choices. We're coming at that from a situation where we've been talking about kids, where we are working from a different perspective. When we do the autonomy independence stuff, we're working from the inside out, I think is maybe the way I want to put that. When we've been talking about children, we're working from the outside in. We're coming from with an external judgment about the things that child should have. And we're able to do that because we are parents, guardians, members of communities that have got an obligation to protect. So, come back. There are, Lockie, you help me. Belgium permits medical aid in dying
It's the
for.
Groningen protocol in the Netherlands,
Go
where
on.
a baby that is born with severe, all these language of birth defects, and it's believed that they'll die, I think, in under a year or 6 months. Then the parents can consent to essentially euthanasia for that child. And I believe that's the only context in which a substitute decision maker can consent for essentially made for another individual.
So let's bang home that point, right? That is, in all of the jurisdictions where medical aid in dying, or whatever it gets called, is permitted, it's self-directed, right? It's me, and that's what makes it profoundly different from murder. What makes it different is that I choose it. So what happens when those ideas get extended on the basis of the intolerable suffering of the person concerned? So the argument has to be that it's being done in their best interests. And so the argument has to be, your life is so terrible that you're better off not having it. You're better off being dead. And that's a, no, just saying it out loud, I think should, Yvonne's, who's best in, Yvonne, yes, Yvonne. I mean, that's, yes, Yvonne, what you're pointing to is that it's so easy to slip from what is supposed to be an external evaluation of the interests of some other person. It's so easy to slip from that to, well, it costs us a whole bunch of money to keep these really fragile, really needy, young people alive, and just we can use the money better somewhere else. So let's permit MAID under those circumstances. Really easy to slip from the burden on my family is so great caring for this child that we'd all be better off if that child. You okay with this? You can see how that slip is really easy to make and, of course, profoundly dangerous. So one response would be, well, then we can't permit it. We can't ever permit it because we can't do it appropriately. But what that does is it condemns some children, presumably, to a life of intolerable suffering, a life that they could have been spared from. If we'd have had the courage to say, yeah, we know this is terrible, but we'll make the best decision that we think we can from the outside. All right, good. Is there anything else to say about that? It just, yeah, I don't remember who made the comment from last time, but you're picking up really challenging ideas that are related to the core concepts that with this, these sessions have been working. What is it to be a person? What do we owe other persons? What are the boundaries of the decisions that I'm permitted to make? So Lindsay says criteria and guidelines, the boundaries, the rules. What are the rules that would guide people to make that? To make that possible. All right, is that enough for that for now? We'll do more on MAID next week for certain, because we're going to do end of life stuff next week, and I think MAID ends up being a pretty special case for sort of puzzles about end of life care. We okay? Should we go to ethics for grown-ups? Give me a nod. All right. Can you see my screen? Okay. So look what this one is called. This is called consent and dissent. So I'm going to try and make the case autonomy, power, and control. This is all about what I'm entitled to do, what you're entitled to do, what the boundaries of my person and freedom might be, and what other people, on behalf of the state, what other people are permitted to do to me. Does that set up as a sort of set the context? Okay. Let's do our usual housekeeping. But you know all of this. You will get the evaluation piece at the end, and you can request certificates there. You're using chat just fine, but I'd be happy to hear your voices too. So by all means, feel free to jump in and say stuff. We have been doing land acknowledgements. I'm not going to read it by rote. I mean, we've done this before. The idea that we'll carry with us for, I would say, a better reconciliation acknowledgement for this session would be, in a whole load of ways, what we are taking for granted as we think about all of these topics, and in particular, what we're going to think about today. We are going to be working from core conceptions of what it is to be a person. Questions about my rights as a person, questions about the boundaries on my personhood. I would say that in some indigenous traditions, that very concept of the person is not shared in the same way. So we're going to be talking about a small l liberal conception of an autonomous independent human being. An autonomous independent human being that has relationships with other autonomous independent human beings. It's a unitary sense of self that I control, and where I control the connections that I make with other persons. That's not the only way of thinking about a person. So many people would think about themselves as intrinsically connected to family, intrinsically connected to community, and I don't want to take anybody's voice, but intrinsically connected to place. Does that go on? Fernanda's given me a bit of a nod. Does that make sense to you? I mean, so, let me do mine. You can tell I'm English. Well, I left home. I left. I've got Simon and Garfunkel's The Boxer in my head. I am just a poor boy. Anyway, I left my home and my family when I was no more than a boy. That is, and many of us have. We have left the places and the people that gave birth to us and the locations where we were born, and we've picked up and gone somewhere else. We've made relationships with people that we would never have come across in our home communities. We're in physical locations that are so unlike the places. I'm getting nods. I should be getting nods, and that's a picture of a person that views each one of us as autonomous, independent, self-directed. Get up and go. You want to go, go. Which is quite different from a view of the person as being necessarily connected to family. That doesn't make sense to think of you separate from community and place. Is that so? Let that be our land acknowledgement for today. It's that we are for certain operating in a small L liberal, Western, autonomous, independent conception of what it is to be a person. And we're going to see that really unpacked as we come at the Healthcare Consent Act. I'm sure I'm going to have a slide on this in a bit. So we're going to come at this through the notion of consent. So I think in week one, we must have mentioned Kant, who said something like, you can't use other people as things. So something like, if you're going to do something with another person, you're going to have to treat that person as a person. And what that means, what's fantastic about persons, is that we get to make our own choices. We get to make ourselves up as we go along, which means that if we're going to do anything together, we're going to have to agree. You should all be nodding. You should all be thinking, I do not for one moment permit the idea that some other human being controls me. You don't control my body. You don't control my ideas. Who made you the boss of me? No one. God, I should be getting not. We take this completely for granted, right? So that forms the basis of the Healthcare Consent Act. The key idea is that people, doctors, can't do stuff to other people without those people's consent. It makes sense? If we're going to do this, we're going to have to do it together. You need my permission. And then that becomes consent in the healthcare context. And then maybe it becomes informed consent. The ideal piece here is that consent is voluntary. You can't make me consent. You should be, oh yeah, that is I agree because you are threatening me, because you are trying to force me to do it. That agreement is not voluntary and is not then a valid consent. You okay with that? You got to mean it. You got to choose it yourself. Voluntary. Puzzles about all of these. It's got to be capable. By that we mean the person must have the capacity to make the agreement. All right, and we're going to worry about what that means. and it's got to be understood. I can't agree to something if I don't know what it is. That sound right? Yeah, I think it does. Okay, let's unpack some of these. So this is the legal foundation of consent. An offensive touching or invasion of the body, if not consented to, is a trespass against the person, redressable in an action for damages. So that's a legal idea that says you can't touch me. That's an touching or invasion of the body, if not consented to. Right? It's the core idea is that as persons, I was going to use the word sacrosanct. We're bounded. We've got armor, and you're not allowed to touch me unless I say you can. Any dissent? This is a core conception of what it is to be a person and what it is to have integrity, autonomy, and independence as a person. Does that, we're okay? Okay. All right. Go on, do you like the graphic? And the graphic is intentionally gendered. Just to make you smile. So this is that Kantian idea that we were picking up last time. Act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of another, always as an end and never as a means only. So that's a logical idea. That is, if I'm a person and you're a person, and if the interesting thing about being persons is that we get to make our own choices, that's what it is to be human, that we are autonomous and independent, we get to make our own choices, then logically, I can't treat you as a means to my objectives. I can't use you as a thing for my purposes. I don't even think that's morality. I think that's logic. I've made a mistake because I've treated you as a thing that you are not. I've treated you as an object, not as a person. Is that? I think, yeah, there's a lot of Kant, but that's a beautiful idea and a really elegantly expressed idea. So Faden and Beecham say that persons should be free to choose and to act without controlling constraints imposed by others. That's a little bit different. So probably what I've been talking about until now is freedom from. I am free from your interference. And I think what Faden and Beecham are talking about here is freedom to. You okay with the distinction? It's quite an important one, and I think Faden and Beecham are probably right, but they're not as right as Kant. That is, I think I would defend the idea that we're on far stronger grounds when we say you can't interfere with me, right? When we're saying I should be free from external interference. I think that's a far solider, is that a word? Yeah, far more basic idea than the idea that I ought to be free to do certain things. Anyway, you can think about that, but I think there's a genuine distinction between freedom from and freedom to. Here they're talking about freedom to. The last couple of slides we were talking about freedom from. I would say that the Healthcare Consent Act is freedom from, that it's grounded in that idea that it protects me. So look here, I've got it, isn't it? So I would say that the Healthcare Consent Act, the whole doctrine of consent, isn't a right to consent, doesn't grant a right to consent. It grants a right to refuse. I'm getting a nod from Lindsay. That makes sense, doesn't it, Lindsay? It's Sure, we go through the consent process. Yeah. The power that comes with the Healthcare Consent Act. Hang on, Belinda, we're going to come back to people who are not capable. So for certain, yes, but we're going to get to people who are not capable from people who are capable. Okay, because so just hang on a bit. We'll for certain get there. But go to Lindsay's nod. um, what we're the power that comes with the doctrine of consent is the power of refusal. Sound okay? Oh, we'll get Belinda. Just wait a minute, will you? Because one of the things we're going to talk about are those limits. Those are exactly the limits. But we'll get there. She's rushing on. Where is she? I can't see her. I'm going to give her a firm look. I'm giving you a firm look, Belinda. We will get to the points that you're making there. So, let me do let me do the way the Healthcare Consent Act conceives consent and the way in which it conceives the relationship between the healthcare provider and the recipient of healthcare. So I sometimes paint this as sort of a ping pong match of different authorities. So in the first instance, mostly, and with a nod to Belinda, unless I am found unconscious on the sidewalk, mostly I present myself to the healthcare provider. Okay, that is, I decide if I'm going to seek treatment. I decide if the problem that I'm experiencing is sufficiently great that I need some help dealing with it. You should nod here. I'll go and see my family doc. I'll present at the emergency department. Now, to Belinda's point, you might find me under a truck, and that's a little different. But mostly the way this works is I present, number one, I come with my problem, and then I explain that problem to my healthcare provider, my physician, typically. What the physician has to do then, so my story is my story. It feels the way it feels. And my physician will ask me a whole bunch of questions and then do a whole load of tests to try to connect what it is that I feel with what might be a cause. And then what the physician does is performs a diagnosis. Now, my expertise about what it feels like, I'm the expert on that. I might not have the right words, but it's my lived experience. Did you get a nod? Do I have the authority to diagnose? You should be saying no, no. That's the physician's job. That's why they're the expert. They've got a whole load of knowledge, skill, and experience. The healthcare team has got a whole load of knowledge, skill, and experience to understand my experience and to turn that into a diagnosis. Yeah, go on. That is, if you like, the authority starts with me. I bring my story, and then it switches to the physician, healthcare team, who's going to perform a diagnosis and make a recommendation for treatment. Go on, and again, you should be nodding. Do I get to, I don't know, perform my own diagnosis and order my own treatment? I can certainly come with suggestions, and you want me to. You want me to have consulted the relevant authorities, Dr. Google. You want me to care about my own healthcare and treatment, but you're the experts. You get to determine what treatment is appropriately offered. Are you okay with this? Yvonne, wait for a minute. Oh man, you're going too fast. So look, I present, you diagnose, you offer a treatment, and now Yvonne, it comes back to me. Yeah, absolutely. You offer the treatment, and I get to decide whether or not I accept it. We can have there's some room for some haggling here. I might say, oh, I'm really worried about this. Is there something different that we could do? For certain. What I'm after is that the power, the authority starts with me because I present. It then goes to you. Oops. It goes to you because you're the expert healthcare team who performs the diagnosis and offers a treatment. And then it comes back to me, Yvonne's point. No, I don't want that treatment. I don't want those side effects. Right? That's nope, does not fit with the way in which I want to live my life. Um, is there something different? So let me do what would be the hardest examples. The puzzles and challenges that come with treating people who are intravenous drug users are profound, right? So this is the patient who's got endocarditis, who needs a 6-week course of intravenous antibiotics, and who feels quite a bit better after a couple of days, maybe a week or so, and will not stay in the hospital for the continued IV treatment and then seeks to leave. This is this puzzle playing out in practice, right? The patient needs the treatment. The gold standard treatment is that intravenous antibiotic treatment. Many physicians would not order that, knowing that I'm a drug user, and then allow me to go back out into the community. So they won't offer IV antibiotics to be administered in the community. They'll require that it's done in the hospital. That's the offer of treatment. But it turns out I can't accept that offer. I can't live with that. So I end up going AMA or whatever, right? So that's PICC lines, absolutely. That's exactly the issue. I'm going to go and use you're worried that I'm going to go and use my PICC line to continue to use. And you're worried that if I do that, I will die and that you'll feel guilty about it. So I'm using that as an example of the way in which those different authorities interplay. At the end of the day, that person who leaves against medical advice and gives up their treatment is exercising their independent autonomous choice to refuse the treatment as it's offered. Okay. All right. So that I've got here the right to dissent protects patient autonomy. It's not a right to choose. There's a right to refuse. Better. It's just not as catchy. There's not a right to choose anything. There's a right to choose from amongst the treatments that are offered. It just doesn't sound as good to say that. It's just, anyway. So I've got a right to refuse. We've been doing this. Authority in healthcare decision making, that sort of ping pong, your turn, my turn piece. But there are other ways of thinking about what that relationship is between the healthcare team or the healthcare provider and the recipient of healthcare. So I've given you that ping pong alternating authorities could be thought of as the informative model. So the role of the healthcare provider is to inform the patient, and then I get to make my own choices. An alternative model, sometimes called a deliberative model, is something like where the physician and the patient, or the healthcare team and the patient, are coming to a genuine agreement. It's not a this is what you can have, no, I don't want it, or this is what you can have, yes, I accept. It's rather, to go back to that endocarditis example, I think there's some fairly good evidence that in some cases, it's completely appropriate for the physician to offer the PICC line in the community with appropriate teaching. I'm getting a nod from Lindsay. understanding the risk, and where the patient themselves are given the authority to work out how they're going to manage that. And I think those of you that have been sort of party to that, you'll have some stories where the patient says, no, I can't handle that. I will use it. So don't give me that. In which case, maybe the second line alternatives, different forms of antibiotic treatment, that becomes better than no treatment at all. So there, what's happening, I'm going to use that. I'm going to use the language of there being a deliberative model there, where the physician says this is what the gold standard treatment would be, and the patient might say, no, that won't work for me. I can't do that. So if we got anything that maybe isn't as good but is better than nothing, and can the good physician do that, or can the good physician say, oh, I hate the risk, but it's better than the alternative, which is that you don't get treatment at all. Does that, am I going to get some, okay, fine. Now, there are limits to that deliberative piece. And this is a whole ton of puzzles that are associated with this too. So the law limits the things that you can do. Let me do an example. Maybe we should have done this when we were doing the kid one. I have got, I don't know, several examples from gynecologists who have patients who have developmental delays, who are being cared for by their parents, and where mum comes in and says, will you sterilize my daughter because she's becoming sexually active, sexually interested, and it would be catastrophic if she became pregnant. What do you think? Carrie, jump in. Now you're muted, Carrie. You have to unmute.
I thought you guys muted me. Kind of had personal experience with this. So my mother's grandmother, she had remarried. The fellow had 4 children, and 3 of them were mentally handicapped. So she actually, and I'm talking probably like 50 years ago, my grandmother did have the 2 girls, she had their tubes tied because of that reason. And I didn't find out about it because I was still young, but later when my mom told me, and just knowing, like she ended up getting married and she did live on her own, but not a high functioning.
Yeah.
So I myself agreed with it.
So look, and I'm going to go to Corinne's comments in the chat. I'd said catastrophic. So when I said catastrophic, I was pretending to be the mum. So this is, and I want you to imagine a loving mum looking at her kid and saying, from everything, go back to Robert Latimer, from everything I know about my daughter, it would be terrible if she became pregnant. And, for reasons, we can do the other stuff, the other methods of birth control are unacceptable, and you can tell your own story about why they might be unacceptable. I just want to try to paint a picture where a loving parent trying to think in terms of the best interest of their beloved but really vulnerable kid says, will you do this? Oh, look, Corinne, I didn't say it was easy, nor would I say that every mother would say the same thing. I just want to, I've got a couple of versions of this story where, as it was presented to me, the clinician absolutely accepted that mum was trying to do the very best that she could for a daughter that she genuinely cared about. So come on, should the physician do it? Nobody's saying anything in the chat, Lockie. They refuse to commit. I've got a no and I've got a yes. So the story I'm trying to tell, the piece is exactly one of those stories. I think, to do your own details to the story, but I think you can tell a story where we would agree that it was in the best interests of the young person never to be able to be pregnant. I think we can, so let's tell the story in that way. And then what should happen? So, Crystal, to you, please.
Sorry, I just wanted to let you know I seem to be locked out of the chat. I don't know if anybody else is having that experience, but I've tried refreshing it and I can't read anything that's in there.
The most recent thing I've got is from Carrie at 8:23. I don't know, can other people see Carrie at 8:23? Reshma.
I just wanted to say I had the same issue and I had to log off and log back in. And it worked for me.
Look, don't ask me. I don't know. In that case, Crystal, if you can't see the chat, talk to us. Tell us what you were going to put in the chat. And the same for...
I'm having several things as well, and I think I might log out and come back in.
Okay. And look, when you do that, if you're not seeing the chat, if you're in the challenging situation where some people are and other people are not, if you can't see it, jump in and say something. Crystal, talk to us. Have you got to unmute there? Go on.
So I was at Rock University today, actually talking with an ethics class for nursing students, and we really talked a lot about what informed consent is for Indigenous people, because typically we've been considered wards of the government. So we had like an extensive conversation about this and who's in charge of our bodies. So I didn't mean to raise my hand, but I've really been reflecting on this all afternoon about going into the hospital for things like tonsillitis and coming out and finding out that you've been sterilized while you were in there at the same time. So this stuff's very sensitive for me. And I always say, like, I tell my children, you're the boss of your body. So that's my philosophy. Like, you're in charge of your own body, and your mental capacity should reflect that as well. So I don't think we can just make like a broad statement here. It's got to be every individual case.
Oh, Crystal, thank you. Our history of doing things to people in healthcare, and for certain the way in which that has targeted Indigenous peoples, the way in which the healthcare has been used as a tool of colonialism. Is there a better way of putting it? I don't know if there's and that's not to ascribe motive or anything. It's just the way it works, or the way in which that has unfolded, right? It's terrible. I think there's no other way of putting it. So yes, absolutely, it's terrible.
I would argue that it's a tool of capitalism.
Okay.
Because if you can annihilate Indigenous people, then you have better control of resources. You wouldn't have to, deal with the Indian problem, reproduction, all of that. But maybe I'm getting too deep on this one.
No, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that you are posing the challenges to things that never mind many of us, that I often take for granted. So I think what you're doing for us here is saying, hold on a minute, look at the assumptions that lie behind the things that we're talking about. So thank you for doing that. What we're talking about is really hard. So let me come back to the particular story. I can imagine telling a story where good people would agree that it would be in the best interests of the person concerned. Corinne, we live in the grey. It would be in the best interests of the person concerned not to be able to bear children. Let's imagine that you could tell a story where that was the case in some particular situation. Does that mean that the healthcare provider under those circumstances should perform that sterilization? So I'm doing what are the limits on the things that people can agree to. There's actually law on this. So I'm going to have to give you the name of the case. There's a Supreme Court of Canada case called, can't remember, but it's the name of a young woman. And it's the name of a young woman who was sterilized under those circumstances and who went on to say that that was a fundamental breach of her human rights, that nobody could make that decision on her behalf. And the Supreme Court of Canada ruled exactly that. So the law says, even if the physician believed that it would be in the best interests of the person concerned to sterilize her for reproductive or to stop reproduction, the physician is not permitted to do that. It's contrary to Canadian law. So that's a boundary on the agreement that a physician might make with a particular patient. Does that make sense? The physician would be doing something, even if they thought it was the right thing to do, they'd be doing something that's contrary to the law. So one of the ways in which there are boundaries created to stop things that people might agree to, that's one of them. I had a recent case of a physician. This is what it sounded like. It sounded to me as if the physician was going to perform MAID on a patient in the community with the complete agreement of the patient's substitute decision maker, but without going through all of the steps and channels that set up the boundaries around the provision of MAID. Right? So the physician was going to go out, administer a drug that was intended to keep the patient comfortable. Can you see the nod, the wink? Keep the patient comfortable, where the absolute expectation that that comfortable patient would then die. So agreed to by the family, agreed to by the patient, agreed to by the physician, but just against the law. So there are boundaries on the things that people can do in healthcare, boundaries that are created by law, boundaries created by professional practice. So there are a whole bunch of things that, are just contrary to the way in which your professions limit the things that you can do. Okay, limit the things that you can agree to. Boundaries set up by availability. I mean, there might be a possible treatment that it just simply isn't available. And then there are boundaries that are set up by patients themselves, either boundaries through things that they are not able to accept, or boundaries where what the patient is identifying is that treatment would be contrary to my values. So we've been talking a bit about this, voluntary, capable, and understood. Let's just keep going. Voluntary. Free, unforced, uncoerced. Go on. Are those words transparent? Maybe. Well, okay. So let me do Bill C-14 is the MAID legislation. And the phrases that are used in the MAID legislation are without external pressure or without coercion or undue influence. Do you know what that means? Oh, no, I'll tell you. I'm going to have to do it. I'll tell you a maid story. The patient was living in his daughter's home. I think that's right. Daughter's home. Daughter had a young family, new baby. Dad is living in the basement, dying. He's applied for medical aid in dying, has been approved. He meets the conditions for MAID. He has set a date for MAID at the end of the hockey season. So we're, sort of early in the spring. And he says he wants to watch his last Stanley Cup on the TV, and that's when he wants to have MAID. His daughter is completely overwhelmed. She's got a new family. She's caring for a dying parent. It's terrible for her. And she says, Dad, I just can't manage. Look, come Easter, you're going to have to find somewhere else. I can't do it anymore. And so Dad says, well, then I better move up the date for MAID. Oh, good. I got a face from Lindsay. Is Dad making his decision without external pressure? Is Dad making his decision without coercion or undue influence? What do you think? I've got, so Carrie, I think Carrie was asking about the sterilization thing. I think it's early 80s, the court case. I'd have to go and have a look to find it, but I think it's in the early 80s. Okay, so what was I asking? Are you saying, the no's that I'm getting, are you saying he is experiencing external pressure and he is experiencing coercion? I think that's what you're saying. Yeah, okay. Did we start talking about vulnerability earlier? Is he vulnerable to the interests of his daughter? If he said, I'm doing this because I love my girl, yeah, sure, I'd hang around for longer if I could, but I don't want to be a burden on her. I'm going to die anyway, so I'll go earlier. Is that okay? Go on, you're not saying anything. I should tell you, so obviously MAID has been around since the Carter case, and it was a matter of discussion before then. I have had for many years what I have called my ethics focus group. This is a bunch of my friends who will get together periodically, and mainly we drink wine, but we'll argue about absolutely everything. If I told my friends, my wine drinking buddies, that I was prepared to have MAID because, you give me whatever life limiting illness you want, because I didn't want to be a burden on my wife, she's hiding right now. I didn't want to be a burden on her. Do you know what my friends would say? They say, good for you. We don't want you to be a burden on her either. I mean, they would look at my decision and they would say, yes, you're an autonomous, independent, grown up. You're a big boy. And if you choose to do something because you love someone else, that's yours. That's okay. You're not under external pressure and you're not being coerced. What I'm trying to capture is that we absolutely get the idea that in order for a decision to be valid, good, whatever language we want, it's got to be voluntary. Yes. Got to be uncoerced. Yeah, go on, Lindsay.
I was going to say, I think where we're getting mixed up here is that his decision to have MAID never changed. What changed is the date. So in many ways, it's external pressure to change the date, but it's
Yep.
not external pressure for the outcome of having mate.
That I think is absolutely right. Yes. The date on which he will die is influenced by his daughter and her needs. That he will die is not. I mean, he's got the disease that he has, and he's chosen that maid route. Yeah, you could retell the story to make it, I think it's time for me to go. I'm a burden on my family. What I'm trying to pick up, I don't know if we're doing two things or several things. One of them is the idea that some words have got their moral evaluation buried right in them. So if I say that you've been coerced, I've said that something bad has happened. There's no good coercion. Right? If it was good coercion, it would be, not that one. I think I want the next one. Oh, there you go. So coercion is a word which carries its moral evaluation on its face. It's bad. So what's the difference between inform, encourage, persuade, cajole, coerce, and bully? You're going to say bullying is bad, coercion's bad, cajoling. Is that bad? Educating. That's not bad. Are you okay with so all of you have a whole load of stories around trying to get the DNR, and where the patient's family says, you keep coming harassing me, to say, I don't want it, go away, don't keep asking me. And what we would say is that we're seeking to educate. We're ensuring that the person really understands the nature of the decision that they make. We're talking about the same thing. We've just got completely different experiences of what that interaction and relationship is like. Yeah, well, we can do this. We're still stuck with this information exchange between the healthcare provider and the patient, and what that relationship looks like. So the fact value distinction, it's a pretty classical distinction that you get in philosophy. Something like objective, subjective. I'm the expert on my values. You can't tell me what to value. But you, as the expert healthcare provider, you may well know the facts better than I do. I can have my own opinion, but I can't have my own facts. We use that sort of language all the time. And I can't go from an is, this is what the case, to a should, what ought to be the case. And the patient, I own the values piece, but you, the healthcare provider, have got the authority around the fact piece. I don't think I've got a slide on it here, or maybe we'll have one next week. But the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario says that physicians are obliged around end-of-life care to do things like advanced care planning, and to do work on goals of care. And one of the phrases that it uses, it says that physicians have got an obligation to explain the available and obtainable treatment goals. So available and obtainable. So one way of thinking about that is that the expert healthcare provider, physician role, is to create the box within which I can make my choices. Right? So who wants to live forever? Well, me. It just turns out you should be hearing Queen in the background there. Can you hear Queen? So the next piece is, but that turns out not to be an obtainable goal. And the role of my healthcare providers, physician in particular, is to say, yeah, I know you might want that, Rob, but that's not what's in your future. to set the boundaries around the sorts of things that I can legitimately hope for. All right, let's go back over here. What have we got? We did that one. Okay, so we said voluntary, capable, and understood. So the capable piece, I must be capable of making my own healthcare decisions. The Healthcare Consent Act is really clear, I think, on the rules. The first piece for capacity is that we are unless we are not. So the assumption, it's written into the Healthcare Consent Act, you are capable of making your own healthcare decisions unless somebody can show that you aren't. You should get a nod. That's a really big deal. It means that if you like, the burden of proof, however you want to put that, falls on the healthcare provider to say, no, this person is not capable. I don't have to prove that I'm capable. You have to show that I'm not. That's I was reading some stuff on the Consent and Capacity Board. Maybe it was a talk by the Consent and Capacity Board a couple of weeks ago, and the lawyer talking about the Consent and Capacity Board says, in a CCB hearing, the burden of proof is on the healthcare provider to show that the person is not capable. The person who is defending themselves, or who's there saying, "Yeah, I'm capable," they don't have to prove that. They don't have to demonstrate to the Consent and Capacity Board that they're capable. It's the responsibility of the person who's saying that they're not to demonstrate that they're not. Does that make sense? It's a really powerful idea, I think. Again, under the Healthcare Consent Act, capacity is decision and time specific. So I might be capable of deciding this, but not that. I might be capable of deciding now, but not later. I might be capable of not capable of deciding now, but capable of deciding later. Does that make sense? It's finely calibrated. And then the definition of incapacity is that I am unable to understand and appreciate. So let me just do some of that. Well, let's do it in practice. So first piece, the fact that I say, no, I don't want the treatment that you are recommending does not mean that I am incapable. Go on, you should nod, right? It's probably the first reason that you take for thinking that I might not be capable, that I'm disagreeing with the treatment that's being proposed by this wise and caring healthcare team. Conversely, agreeing with the treatment doesn't mean that I am capable. That's pretty clear. Although having said that, it's going to be very, very rare, go on, Lockie's nodding, that you're going to question my capacity if I'm agreeing with you. Just, yeah, fine, good, off we go, off to the races. The next piece, which is even more interesting, is that my best interests are irrelevant to an assessment of whether or not I'm capable. It does not matter. If I'm capable, I am entitled to make the stupidest choices, the most destructive choices, right? Because I'm entitled to make them. This is the power of freedom, if you like. The right is not a right to make good choices. The right is just to choose. And as soon as you start thinking that through, you can see exactly why that's the case. If I only ever had the right to make good choices, I don't have any freedom at all. I've just got the freedom to be just like everybody else. Yeah, freedom, those rights have to have any value, the right to be weird, the right to do stuff that's different. So we're defending something that's I think hugely significant here. So I've got to be able to understand and appreciate. So can I comprehend, retain, process the relevant information? So I would say that the understand bar is a fairly low bar. I don't think I need to be able to do very much to understand the nature of the decision that I have in front of me. I've got to understand the reasonably foreseeable consequences of doing it or not doing it. I've got to understand that I've got a decision to make. That's I think mostly people get understand. I think that people have way more trouble with appreciate, and we'll get there in a moment. In order for me to understand the decision that I have to make, I need to know something about it, probably. So I'll come to that in a minute. What the Healthcare Consent Act says is that I need the information that a reasonable person in the same circumstances would need. So nature and purpose, benefits and risks, reasonable alternatives, impact on me as I am, patient as I am, economic considerations, consequences of receiving the treatment, consequences of refusing the treatment. So that's out of the Healthcare Consent Act. I've added a bit. I've got a whole load of recent cases, actually cases that go back, I think, through all the time that I've been working. Puzzles about, do it with the feeding tube. So the situation would be a patient who is not capable of consenting to their own treatment. They're unable to swallow. In order to keep them alive, they will need to have a feeding tube. But so far, they've always been pulling tubes out. So in order to keep the feeding tube in, you would have to restrain the person. So what I'm trying to capture is that there's a difference between consenting to a feeding tube and consenting to a feeding tube plus restraints. Does that make sense? Go on, nobody's answering. And I think if you add that in, if you add the restraint piece in there, some physicians, I had a consult last week where the physician said, I'm not going to offer a feeding tube if it means that the patient is going to have to be restrained for the entire time that that feeding tube is in, as in rest of their lives. That I'm not prepared to do that because I think it's cruel. And you could also see why a substitute decision maker would say, no, if you've got to strap them down, no. I just found, so Carrie likes live for a year, so do I. Now, yes, so Belinda restraints. If you told me that we'd have to do it for a short period of time, I think that would be a different thing. If you told me that we were going to try the feeding tube and we'll, restrain the person for a short period of time and then take the restraints off, and if they pulled the restraints out, we would take that to mean that they did not want if you then pulled the tube out, we would take that to mean that they didn't want the tube and we wouldn't reinsert it. I think that's fine. What I think is tragic are those situations where somebody is permanently strapped down in order for them to continue to have this invasive feeding mechanism. Now, Yvonne's talking about families. We haven't yet started to talk very much about substitute decision making. Most of the time we've been talking about what it is to understand and appreciate, and we haven't yet got to what happens when somebody else has to make the decision for me. I'm sure we're going to push most of that into next week. At the moment, and Yvonne, your point is a really, really important one. We'll have a ton of stories next week about the challenges of substitute decision makers making decisions on behalf of the people that they love. But let me do a couple more things. I think I've got a few more before we finish today. I've got hundreds. That's different, isn't it? So let me do appreciate. Appreciate is the ability to appreciate, not that I agree with you. And that ability word is really, really significant. I've got to have the ability to appreciate the reasonably foreseeable consequences of the decision or the lack thereof. Now, let me do, I think I probably did, yeah, this one. So this case, the Supreme Court of Canada case, it's called Starson versus Swayze. In this story, Starson was in a locked mental health unit. So he was being held under the Mental Health Act, and because he'd been threatening, I think was the story there. He'd made death threats against his work colleagues. His psychiatrist said that he had just the thing he needed. He had the fix for him. He would provide him with whatever the drug was that would sort of, I don't know, fix him, be okay. He would be able to fit in with the rest of the world. Starson, turns out, was a genius mathematician. I mean, as in crazy genius physicist mathematician. He'd published papers with Nobel Prize winners. I mean, smart guy, right? Starson said, "No, I don't want it. I don't want the drug because I think it dulls my mind." Right? The Consent and Capacity Board agreed with the psychiatrist. Starson appealed. It made its way all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, which was interpreting the Healthcare Consent Act in his case. And what the Supreme Court of Canada said was, "Oh, look, he's got the ability to appreciate." So what the psychiatrist said he didn't appreciate was how much better his life would be if he could fit in normally and he didn't have to be in a locked unit anymore. And what Starson showed, what the Supreme Court of Canada accepted, was that, oh yeah, he could see that could be the case. He had the ability to appreciate that, but he didn't want that. That in his view, he was better off if he didn't do that. The Supreme Court in that judgment too also said that whether or not it's good for him is totally irrelevant. So even if we all stood around and agreed that Starson would be better off drugged and, burbling along in his community, even if we all agreed that, he was still entitled to say no. Because the question was not what is good for him, it's whether his psychiatrist had shown that he was not able to understand and appreciate the nature of the decision that he had. And if he's able to understand and appreciate, he's entitled to make the decision, even if that ends up being self-destructive. So that's there. All right. Maybe I'll do one more thing and then we'll stop for today. Yeah, so this is straight Healthcare Consent Act. We've been sort of I've been giving you the background of the Healthcare Consent Act. Now I'm just quoting it. Section 1C says that the Healthcare Consent Act is an act to enhance autonomy. It's just right there up front. The rule is no treatment without consent. That's section 10. And you can't administer the treatment unless you get consent from a capable patient or consent from a substitute decision maker if the patient is incapable. There's one exception, and it's the emergency section. It's section 25. So section 25 says that you can treat a patient in an emergency. It then defines emergency. Immediate action is required to stop or alleviate significant suffering and to prevent serious bodily harm, something like that. So there's wording in the Act that defines what an emergency is, and it says under those circumstances you can treat the patient without their consent. But there's an exception to the emergency exception. And the exception to the emergency exception is no treatment contrary to the patient's prior wishes. So this is what it says. A health practitioner shall not administer a treatment under Section 25, the emergency exception, if the health practitioner has reasonable grounds to believe that the person, while capable and after attaining 16 years of age, expressed a wish applicable to the circumstances to refuse consent to the treatment. I'm going to give you two stories and then I'll stop. I'm going to do Annie and the Bags of Blood. I haven't done this before, have I, with you lot? I don't think so. So Annie and the Bags of Blood. I was in Kirkland Lake, maybe 10 years ago. And in Kirkland Lake, I was doing a session on this. We were talking about the Healthcare Consent Act. And I casually said that the Healthcare Consent Act was grounded in a case. And then Annie, the person I worked with most closely there, she was by that time the VP Chief Nursing Exec. She put her hands on her hips and she said, Rob, she said, it was here and I was on. So you got to picture Annie as a young nurse in, late 70s. She would have been 22 years old. She was a girl. On as a nurse, motor vehicle accident. The patient had been brought in. The case is called Millett versus Schulman. So the patient is Millett. She's bleeding out from the accident. They found a Jehovah's Witness card in her wallet. And the card said, no blood or blood products. The physician said, not on my watch. And Annie said she was running down the corridor with the bags of blood. You got to picture Annie, right? She's 22 years old. She's a skinny little thing running down the corridor with the bags of blood. And a family member pointing at her saying, that's not for... So the blood was administered. The patient was revived and went on to sue successfully. So that's the Millett versus Schulman case. The judge is fantastic in that case. I've got a slide somewhere with it on. He said something like, people are entitled to say no, they don't want stuff, and you can't override their decision, even if when they said it, they didn't know what was going to happen next. So that is, she said, Millett, I don't want blood. And the judge said, that's what she said. Leave her alone. So that gives rise to this. Have you got reasonable grounds to believe that the person, while capable and after it expressed a wish applicable to the circumstances to refuse consent to the treatment? So I'll leave you with this. This is the Sharpie DNR. So I got a phone call from a physician, an emergency department physician, who said, I've just had a patient come in. She's in the emergency room now. She had attempted suicide in her long-term care home. So, she'd taken the bottle of pills and she was found lying there with her advanced care plan saying, do not attempt to resuscitate me, held in her arms, and Sharpie DNR, written in a Sharpie on her arm, do not attempt to resuscitate me. I'll finish there. So when we come back next week, you're going to tell me what that physician should do. Sound okay? All right, but I'm going to ask you when you come back. Do you honor the Sharpie DNR? Okay. I must have the little evaluation thing at the end here. Let me go there. Please, comments are really useful. They give us a bit of an idea about what you're thinking and the things that you want to pick up. And we will pick this up again next week. Any comments to finish? We're allowed to make bad decisions. I have a lifetime, Corinne, of making bad decisions. Proudly. So thank you, all of you, for hanging on again. And we will wrap this up next week with, as we think about care at the end of people's lives. So thanks to all of you.
Thank you.